My dad can't stand me. He calls me a liar, just like my mom does. He says I'm only good at faking being sick and pathetic to get attention. On my 18th birthday, I reached out to him begging, please, just this once, come. If you don't, I might die. His response was icy. You've even learned how to threaten now? Then go ahead and die. The call cut off, and I forced a bitter smile. The system's voice rang in my ears. Mission failed. The host will be terminated. I died on my 18th birthday. In the end, Mr. Koo, who hated his daughter the most, actually lost his mind. I was pulled into Lily's life when she was 6. The system instructed me that as long as I could get her father to spend one birthday with her, the mission would be complete. At first, I thought it couldn't be easier. Looking in the mirror, my 6-year-old self had a round face and kind eyes. Whenever I walked by, neighborhood ladies couldn't resist hugging and kissing me. Such an adorable kid. Her parents must adore her. But I quickly found out that wasn't true. The person who despised me the most was my own father. Ethan Brooks was forced to marry my mother. Back then, he was the young head of the Brooks Corporation, deeply in love with someone else, a struggling actress in the entertainment scene. My grandfather was livid. He'd always looked down on people in showbiz and forced Ethan to leave his true love and return to an arranged marriage. The match was with my mother, Clara. Ethan only intended to go through the motions to appease my grandfather. But Clara loved Ethan deeply. She had secretly adored him for years, chasing after him desperately, crying for him, going on hunger strikes, even hurting herself. Ethan was overwhelmed by her love. Eventually, Clara got pregnant, and under pressure from both her and his family, Ethan married her. They endured a cold, 6-month marriage. Half a year later, Clara died during childbirth. Ethan wasn't there when she passed or when her funeral was arranged. 3 months later, he returned. The nanny brought me to him. He glanced at me briefly and made a single comment. She looks just like Clara. Then he turned and left without any sign of attachment. By the age of 6, I already understood a lot. In art class, when the teacher asked us to draw our families, I drew only myself and the nanny. The teacher asked, "Where's your father?" "Daddy's on TV." "And your mother?" "Mommy's in heaven." The teacher paused, then patted my head and went to the office to call Ethan. "Mr. Brooks, next Tuesday is Parent-Teacher Day. Could you come and have a talk?" I overheard and felt a spark of hope. Next Tuesday was also my birthday. If Dad came, it would count as spending my birthday with me. On Tuesday, I started waiting from midday. One class after another passed. Finally, after school, a black Mercedes pulled into the school gate. I widened my eyes in anticipation, but the person who got out was a sharply dressed assistant. Ethan asked me to give this to the teacher. The assistant handed a gift box and a shopping card to the teacher. He said, "This child is inherently difficult, probably hard to manage. Sorry for the trouble." The teacher sighed deeply. She wanted to say that wasn't true at all. I was obedient, well-behaved, and diligent in my studies. But the Mercedes had already swiftly turned around and left, as if spending even one more second on me was a waste. For the first time, I realized that parental love was either the easiest thing in the world to obtain or the hardest. I didn't give up trying. At first, I thought that if Dad realized I was actually a good kid, he might start liking me. So I worked hard, becoming an honor student every semester, and my awards covered an entire wall. But it was useless. The nanny sent all this good news to Ethan, but he never replied. Later, some classmates bullied me. They laughed and asked, "You say your dad is Ethan? Liar, look at her. Does she look like the daughter of the CEO of Brooks Group?" Exactly. "No one ever shows up for your parent-teacher meetings. I think you're an orphan." We got into a fight and smashed the glass case by the playground. Glass shattered. Amid the chaos, one of the kids picked up a shard and slashed my arm. In the hospital, I heard those kids' parents whispering, "She's an illegitimate child. Just pay some money and be done with it. Maybe we should talk to the principal and get her expelled. If she stays and says anything, it could damage our little one's reputation." I sat in the hospital room, expressionless. Protecting their own kids is a natural instinct. I didn't blame those parents for wanting to sacrifice me for their children's future. In fact, I even envied those kids a little. Suddenly, the whispering stopped. Instead, I heard startled voices. "Ethan?" Ethan had shown up at the last moment. Behind him were his cold professional assistant, his lawyer, and the principal, who was nodding and bowing. I understand your meaning. This was our school's oversight, the principal said, sweating profusely. We will handle this strictly and expel those responsible. Ethan nodded indifferently. The assistant and lawyer stayed outside to handle the aftermath while he pushed open the door to my hospital room alone. My heart had never felt so warm. In that moment, I thought maybe the ice between Ethan and me was finally melting. Dad, I said, my voice trembling. But the next second, my words caught in my throat because I saw the way Ethan was looking at me, so cold. Lily, you've grown up, he said flatly. You're playing the same tricks your mother used to. Much later, the nanny told me that back then, Clara had hired 2 people to harass her to gain sympathy, then called Ethan crying. How much did you pay those classmates to cooperate with your act? Ethan's dark eyes looked at me, full of ruthless scrutiny. I felt all the blood in my body go cold in an instant. I didn't, I cried, unable to prove myself, only feeling wronged. Ethan looked at me in disappointment for a while, then said softly, I thought you might be different from her, but it turns out you're just like her. He turned and strode away. The principal followed him, unaware of what had just happened in the room, and began praising me to Ethan. Lily is my daughter. I knew it. She looks so much like you, always coming first in exams. Her essays are beautifully written, quite similar to your writing style back in the day. Ethan's footsteps paused slightly. Then he chuckled, softly. What's the use of that? And with that, his footsteps resumed, growing distant. I grew older year by year. Every year, I tried everything I could to get Ethan to spend my birthday with me. Several times, I almost succeeded. But Ethan never came. He'd have his assistant send gifts, each one more expensive than the last, and order a handmade cake worth thousands to be delivered, perhaps in front of others. He still wanted to keep up appearances, but he himself never came, not even once. He despised me, thinking I took after Clara, inherently bad, when I was obedient and studious. He thought I was pretending when I was hospitalized with a high fever. He thought I was faking it for sympathy no matter what I did. It was wrong. The nanny eventually retired, and I was left alone at home. When I got tired of studying, I would watch TV. On TV, Ethan was with Sarah and their son Jason, appearing on a family reality show. Sarah was his teenage sweetheart. After my grandfather passed away, Ethan finally got to be with her. He poured resources into her career, and the once obscure actress was now famous with countless fans. The 3 of them went on a variety show together, a handsome, wealthy father, a beautiful mother, and an adorable son. How wonderful. I was happy for Jason. He had the happiest family in the world, and Jason was indeed happy. Despite Ethan's busy schedule, he always found time to help Jason with homework, build Lego sets, and play basketball. The comments on the screen kept scrolling. Mr. Brooks is the best dad in the world. So jealous. I wish I had a dad like that. I smiled and turned off the TV. Tomorrow was my 18th birthday. This was my last chance. If I still couldn't complete the mission, the system would terminate me. I picked up the phone and called Ethan. He didn't answer no matter how many times I tried. So I had to leave a voicemail. Dad, please. You only come of age once in a lifetime. You've never been there for any of my birthdays. Just this once. Can you spend it with me? Otherwise, I might die. After a long while, a voice message appeared on the screen. With trembling fingers, I pressed play. Ethan's voice was cold and mocking. You've even learned to threaten now? Then go ahead and die. The birthday candles burned out. The flame flickered one last time and went out. I dipped a fork into the frosting on the cake and put it in my mouth. Sweet and fluffy, like a cloud, but all I could taste was bitterness. Host, time is almost up. The clock's hands were about to strike midnight. On his social media, Ethan had just posted a new update, a photo of Jason smiling on a golf course. The caption was brief, but full of affection. Spent today with Jason practicing golf. The little guy made great progress, proud of him. I thought for a moment, took a photo of my birthday cake, and posted my own update. No matter what, I still thank you. Not every parent loves their child, but every child is born loving their parents. I will always love you. Goodbye, Dad. The clock struck 12 and I wore my birthday hat. I quietly took my last breath. My soul floated out, suspended in the air, outside the window. Lights were shining in every home, while inside, my body grew colder in the dark solitude. I asked the system, "Why can't I leave yet?" The electronic voice, low and pleasant, replied, "Because it's not over yet." As if to confirm the system's words, 10 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. No one answered. The only one who could open it was lying on the sofa, lifeless. The knocking grew more urgent, louder and louder. Lily, lifeless. The knocking grew more urgent, louder and louder. Lily! Finally, I heard Ethan's voice. "Open the door. I know you're home." I floated in the void, watching Ethan. He was dressed in a suit, frowning, ringing the doorbell over and over. When the bell wasn't loud enough, he switched to pounding on the door. I knew it was childish, but in that moment I couldn't help but hope. Hope that he would open this door, that he would see my body. Would he feel even a tiny bit of regret? Even just a little. But what I hoped for didn't happen. Ethan knocked on the door for a long time, then stepped back. His expression grew colder. He picked up his phone, opened my chat, and pressed the voice message button. "Lily, is this fun for you? Who was that post for, me or everyone else? What? You think if playing the victim doesn't work on me, you'll sell the story to the world and have everyone criticize me? Is that your plan? Let me tell you. I feed you and clothe you. I owe you nothing." After sending the voice messages, Ethan turned and strode away. He entered the elevator, his brows still furrowed. Perhaps his presence was too intimidating. As the little girl who entered the elevator later stood beside him for a few seconds, then started sobbing. The little girl was wrapped in a blanket in her grandmother's arms, likely sick and needing a late-night visit to the hospital. Ethan quickly relaxed his expression. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. Uncle's just in a bad mood because of something else. Did I scare you?" His voice was so gentle. Watching him, I thought to myself, so this is what my dad is like when comforting a child. Since as long as I could remember, he'd never comforted me. Ethan was actually a kind-hearted man. Every year, he anonymously donated to impoverished children in remote areas. His company provided benefits and extra leave for pregnant employees. Even with a stranger's child, he showed the utmost patience and kindness. But when it came to his own daughter, all his tenderness seemed sealed away, leaving only coldness and impatience. In that moment, Ethan soon managed to soothe the little girl. He called a car for the girl's grandmother. And while waiting, the little girl, with her fever-reddened face, even started chatting with him. "Uncle, do you have kids?" "Yes. How many?" Ethan paused for a moment. "Two," he said quietly. "A son and a daughter." So I was still considered his daughter. The car arrived, and the little girl took a candy from her pocket and put it in Ethan's hand. "For you, Uncle," she said, smiling brightly. "Your daughter must be very lucky." She waved at Ethan as her grandmother carried her into the car. The car drove off, and Ethan stood there, holding the candy. "Your daughter must be very lucky." I saw him take out his phone and open my WeChat moments, scrolling up and down. "What are you looking for, Dad? Searching for signs of my happiness? Don't bother, there won't be any." My posts were only visible for the past 3 days, so all he could see was the picture of my birthday cake. "No matter what, I still thank you. Not every parent loves their child. Goodbye, Dad." He exited my moments. My chat was empty, with no reply. This wasn't normal. In the past, it was always me messaging him and him ignoring me. It had never been him messaging me and me not replying. Ethan hesitated for a moment, then opened the phone app and entered my number. But the next second, his phone rang. The caller was Sarah. "Ethan, come home quickly. Jason seems to have a fever." Ethan's car sped all the way home. He walked in, met by Sarah's worried face, and immediately asked, "Where's Jason?" Jason was lying on the sofa, eyes closed, with a fever patch on his forehead. Ethan approached him, the urgency in his eyes undeniable. "Jason, how are you?" Jason weakly opened his eyes a sliver. "It hurts." "Where does it hurt?" "My head. It hurts so much." Jason's voice was weak, but had an exaggerated theatrical quality. And though he said his head hurt, he was holding his stomach. Ethan was silent for 2 seconds, then reached out to feel Jason's arm and legs. Jason's body wasn't hot at all. Jason, are you really sick? Jason blinked. Of course I am. All right, I'll take you to the hospital now. If you're sick, you need to rest well. I'll give the tickets for tomorrow night's soccer match to a colleague. No, Jason panicked, springing up from the sofa. You can't give them away. Realizing his mistake, Jason looked at Ethan guiltily, trying to lie back down, but Ethan's expression had already turned cold. Jason, you can ask Dad for anything, and if I can give it to you, I will. But I don't like children who lie. I've told you this many times. His tone was severe, and tears quickly welled in Jason's eyes. Sarah immediately came over. Don't be so hard on him, Ethan. He's just a kid, she said, holding onto Ethan's arm. I'm the one who told Jason to pretend to be sick. Blame me if you want. Ethan's expression softened. He rubbed his temples and said quietly, Nonsense. Sarah pouted and rubbed her head against his shoulder, then smiled reassuringly at Jason. All right, sweetheart, go back to your room. Mommy needs to talk to Daddy. Seeing that Ethan was no longer angry, Jason's face brightened, and he happily went to his room to watch anime. Sarah pulled Ethan to sit down. Ethan's expression hadn't completely softened. Why did you have Jason pretend to be sick? Sarah hesitated. After a moment, she asked haltingly, Did you go to see that girl? She didn't say my name. She didn't call me Ethan's daughter. She just said that girl. It was her way of drawing a clear line, implying that I wasn't part of this family. Ethan said nothing. Sarah's voice was gentle. I don't mind, but I'm worried about Jason. Ethan, you're Jason's father. You know how much Jason loves you. If Jason knew that his dad was giving his love to someone else, he'd be heartbroken. There was a long silence. Finally, Ethan patted Sarah's hand. Don't worry, that won't happen. Sarah let out a long sigh of relief. I watched from the side, strangely feeling no pain. I had been here once before. Back then, I was still in elementary school, and Ethan's assistant had come to my school a few times, attending parent-teacher meetings on Ethan's behalf. The assistant pitied me, feeling that Ethan misunderstood me too deeply. So he found a way to bring me to Ethan's house, hoping I could have a meal with them. When I was sent over, Ethan hadn't come home yet. Jason was at his swimming lesson, and only Sarah was in the living room. Sarah was very friendly. As soon as I entered, she took my hand. This must be Lily. You're so beautiful. In that moment, I felt a pang of guilt because I knew I looked a lot like my mother, Clara, even though Ethan hated me for that, let alone Sarah, who had once lost him to Clara. But Sarah was so kind. She smiled and settled me in the living room, asking what I liked to eat and play with, then brought me all kinds of snacks, comic books, and game consoles. At first, I was shy, but all these new things were irresistible. Soon, I was eating chocolate cookies and reading comics. Half an hour later, Jason came back. He didn't seem to mind my presence, but when he saw that I was eating his snacks and holding his comic books, he pouted immediately. Before I could say anything, Sarah quickly pulled him away. She took Jason to his room. I hesitated for a moment, then timidly walked over and knocked on the door. I'm sorry, Sarah cut me off, smiling gently at me. It's all right, Lily. Go read your comics. I need to talk to Jason for a bit. I had no choice but to return to the living room and pick up the comic book again. But no matter how exciting the story got, I couldn't focus. The door to the bedroom was slightly ajar, and I could see Sarah talking to Jason, who looked more and more upset, his eyes redder and redder. 10 minutes later, Ethan came home. The moment he walked in, Jason rushed over and threw himself into Ethan's arms, crying loudly. Ethan was stunned. He picked up Jason, asking him over and over what was wrong, but Jason was crying too hard to answer. Sarah walked up to Ethan, watching Jason sob. Her eyes reddened slightly. Ethan turned to ask Sarah what had happened. Sarah glanced at me hesitantly, then sighed and shook her head without saying anything. Jason cried for 5 whole minutes. Those were the hardest 5 minutes of my life. I watched as he cried, snot and tears streaming down his face, while Sarah wept silently beside him, and Ethan tried to comfort him. I stood there, unable to do anything but watch the second hand tick forward on the giant clock. After 5 minutes, Jason was exhausted, finally shifting from sobbing to sniffling. Daddy, he said, clinging to Ethan's neck, smearing snot and tears on his suit. Lily took my snacks and comics. She wouldn't give them back. I was so scared. I stood there, feeling like I had fallen into an icy abyss. I opened my mouth and said weakly, I didn't take them. I didn't take them. Aunt Sarah gave them to me. I never take things from other kids, no matter how much I want them. In preschool, the teacher even praised me for being the most well-behaved. But I couldn't say any of that, because Ethan, while wiping Jason's nose with a tissue, shouted at me, "Shut up." I closed my mouth. The injustice I felt grew and grew. I started to sob quietly. Ethan grew even more impatient. He held Jason tighter and said to me coldly, "Are tears a weapon? First your mom, now you." I bit my lip. "Don't cry," I told myself. Jason's tears would bring him love and sympathy. Your tears would only make them hate you more. Jason was in Ethan's arms, looking down at me. The crystal chandelier hung above, the light so bright I couldn't see his expression. After a moment, Jason turned and hugged Ethan's neck. "Daddy," he called softly. "It doesn't matter if Lily takes my things, as long as no one takes you away. She can have all the chocolate, chips, comics, and games. I just want you." After that, I never went to Ethan's house again. He told the security guards at the gate not to let me in. That overly sympathetic assistant lost his job because of it. From then on, I understood they were a real family and I would never fit in. Ethan married the woman he'd always loved, had an adorable son, and could have walked into a happy and fulfilling future. But I was this indelible stain on his life, keeping him from severing ties with his painful past. His hatred for me was innate, let alone Sarah and Jason. It had been over 3 hours since my death. Ethan hurriedly washed up, preparing to sleep. He had an important shareholders meeting early the next morning, but the meeting didn't happen. 10 minutes before it was set to begin, his secretary rushed in. "Mr. Brooks, there's a call. It's from Lily's teacher." Ethan had just finished 2 cups of coffee and washed his face with cold water, barely managing to shake off his fatigue. At the mention of my name, he immediately lost his temper. "Why are you reporting trivial nonsense now? Is the projector in the conference room set up?" The secretary quickly left, and Ethan adjusted his suit collar in his office. A few minutes later, the secretary returned, seeing Ethan pick up his car keys, informed the executives that the shareholders' meeting was rescheduled for the afternoon. He rubbed his forehead, exhausted. "What did the teacher say?" "The teacher said that Lily was missing. She hadn't come to class, nor had she called in sick. Her friends had texted and called her, but no one could reach her." Ethan was silent for a few seconds in his office, then sneered. "Is this really worth calling me over for? If I remember correctly, her mother Clara was also one of your students back in the day. Didn't Clara do the same thing back then? Every time she was upset, she'd disappear, making everyone frantically look for her, only for us to find out she skipped school to chase after some celebrity." Ethan stood up. "Mr. Lee, next time, don't bother telling me about such things. I've completely given up on Lily." He reached the door, only to hear a stern voice behind him. "Ethan." Ethan turned back and met Mr. Lee's authoritative gaze. Mr. Lee was the most senior teacher at the school, a veteran educator who had served as vice principal years ago, but insisted on continuing to teach and be a homeroom teacher. Both Ethan and Clara had once been his students. Clara is Clara, and Lily is Lily. Mr. Lee had always been a gentle teacher, guiding his students with patience and warmth, never raising his voice. But now, he brought out the full authority of an old teacher, and his tone towards Ethan was almost scolding. Ethan had an instinctive respect for Mr. Lee and tried to explain. "Lily is Clara's daughter. She resembles Clara so much, you can't deny that." "Ethan, do you remember when your mother was imprisoned for financial crimes, and all your classmates made fun of you?" Mr. Lee's voice softened. "I held a class meeting and gave those bullying students a stern warning. I told them that parents and children are separate individuals, and the mistakes of parents should not be borne by their children. Back then, you cried and thanked me, saying that my words had saved you. Now, 30 years later, as a parent yourself, have you forgotten all of that? Lily and Clara are not the same. They are completely different individuals. Lily is one of my best students. She is hardworking, disciplined, diligent, and never complains when wronged. She always helps her classmates when they need it. Mr. Lee spoke firmly. I am telling you this after almost 40 years of teaching. She is a truly good child. If souls could shed tears, I would be crying at this moment. But I couldn't. So, all that passed through me was a gust of wind, half cold, half burning. I saw Ethan's hand, hanging by his side, begin to tremble. He rarely lost control like this. Ethan, Mr. Lee's voice softened. Lily has never missed a class without notifying us. This is extremely unusual. She may be facing an insurmountable problem. At times like these, the help of outsiders is limited. I hope that, as her only family, you can be there for her. The car was nearing its speed limit, but Ethan kept pressing down on the gas. The rearview mirror reflected his bloodshot eyes, and the GPS navigation's voice announced, "Your destination is ahead." He was rushing to my home. My soul sat quietly in the back seat, watching him. The system hadn't left. Its electronic voice echoed in my ear. "Host, he's coming to find you. Do you feel happy now?" I thought about it seriously, then shook my head. It's too late. I realized that in the moment before I died, I did harbor resentment, hoping to see Ethan regret it. But now I only felt, what was the point? A WeChat message appeared on the phone screen. It was from Ethan. "Lily, today Dad will make up your birthday." But my birthday had already passed. Everything in the past was truly gone. Ethan stopped multiple times on his way to my house. He wanted to buy me some gifts, along with a birthday cake. Although I had received many gifts yesterday, those were bought by his assistant using Ethan's black card. Ethan himself hadn't put in any effort for my birthday. He hadn't even said happy birthday. Now he desperately wanted to make up for it. Ethan entered cake shops and gift stores, but each time he entered, he was filled with new confusion. He didn't know what I liked. Jason liked chocolate, tiramisu, raspberry sauce, one-piece figurines, and signature basketball shoes. But Ethan didn't know what Lily liked. Not at all. In the end, Ethan picked out a strawberry-flavored cake because he vaguely remembered that I seemed to like pink. When I first started first grade, the nanny had taken me to a mall where we ran into Ethan carrying Jason. Ethan was buying toys for Jason, needing 3 assistants to carry everything. Then, perhaps because I looked so pitiful standing by, Ethan handed Jason to an assistant, took my hand, and led me to the counter, asking me what I liked. It was the first time Ethan had held my hand. The warmth of a father's touch was so precious. I was both excited and nervous, stammering as I looked at the shelves of toys. I was afraid that if I spent too much, the little bit of affection I'd managed to get would vanish. So, in the end, I only picked a doll. "Just this?" Ethan asked. "Yes," I nodded. "Her dress is pink." "I like pink." Now holding a pink cake and a pile of other gifts, Ethan entered the elevator, even if I didn't like the rest. I should like this pink cake. With that thought in mind, Ethan stepped out of the elevator. He was greeted by a crowd of onlookers and the police. The police noticed Ethan and approached him. "What is your relation to the resident of Unit 1802? Ethan froze. "What is your relation to the resident of Unit 1802? The officer repeated. I'm her father." Ethan's lips moved, and it took a long time for him to say the words. "Officer, what happened? Did my daughter do something wrong?" "Did she?" Ethan didn't continue because the officer's tone turned somber. "All right, please cooperate with us to confirm the identity of the deceased." It was the nanny who called the police. Although she had already retired, she had taken care of me for many years, and her affection for me had never faded. This time, she came by high-speed train to take care of her daughter during her confinement, and since it happened to be my birthday, she decided to visit me. She knocked on the door for a long time without getting any response. By chance, the landlord was showing the place to prospective tenants and opened the door. In the morgue, Ethan looked at my body. "Is this your daughter?" He was silent for a long time before he nodded. "Preliminary examination suggests a sudden cardiac arrest. So far, we have ruled out foul play." Ethan couldn't hear what the officer said after that. "Ruled out foul play." No, it wasn't true. He knew who killed his daughter. Dad, please celebrate my birthday with me just once. If you don't come, I will die. The sound of my crying still echoed in his ears. Although he didn't understand how it worked, Ethan remembered what Mr. Lee had said. Lily was never one to lie. So, the person who killed Lily was her father. Lily was never one to lie. Every time she asked for help, it was real. Every time she worked hard at her studies, trying to earn his praise. Every time she was sick and in pain, hoping he'd visit her. It was all real. But he had been so fixated on his hatred for her mother that he wrote off all of those things as lies. The police watched as Ethan left. The president of the Brooks Group had no expression on his face. His eyes were vacant, and there wasn't the slightest hint of tears. So heartless. One of the officers thought, the rumors must be true. He really hated his daughter, not even a single tear shed for her. Ethan stepped outside, sunlight pouring down on him. He took out his phone and opened our chat. He scrolled up, reading every message I had sent him. A cat I met on the way to school, my good grades in the midterm exams, a classmate who was sick, and the charity fundraiser I organized for them. Seeing Dad on the cover of a business magazine today and buying many copies to bring home. Dad, can you come to the parent-teacher meeting? It's okay if you can't. I know your work is important. You should focus on that. Message by message. Finally, he stopped at his own reply, the last message he had ever sent me. Then just go die. At 3 in the afternoon, the sun was blinding and cruel. That day, many passersby saw a man in a suit, crouched at the entrance of the police station, crying until his voice broke. Ethan came home late that night. As soon as he walked in, Sarah approached him. Why are you home so late? I called you so many times. But you didn't pick up. Did you go see that girl again? Her tone carried an unmistakable displeasure. Just yesterday, she had pressured Ethan to reduce contact with Clara's child to avoid hurting Jason's feelings. And now today, Ethan was late again. Don't try to lie to me. I called the office and they said you skipped the board meeting. You went to that girl's school. Sarah frowned. Ethan, whether it's skipping school or getting into early relationships, that girl isn't worth your time. She's ruining her own life. Jason is still young. He needs his father's reassurance. She's dead. Ethan suddenly spoke. His cold voice cut through Sarah's incessant chatter. She's dead. Ethan suddenly spoke. His cold voice cut through Sarah's incessant chatter. Lily is dead? A sudden cardiac arrest. Ethan looked at Sarah. His expression was wooden. His throat visibly choked. Sarah took a moment to react, then slowly covered her mouth with her manicured hands. Oh my God. This is really... She blinked and tried hard to squeeze out 2 tears. How could this happen? Ethan looked at her quietly. In truth, Sarah wasn't an actress known for her talent. Her acting could be described as subpar. If Ethan hadn't invested heavily in her projects, she would have struggled to become famous. And now, even as her tears rolled down her cheeks, they only felt fake. Ethan suddenly felt very, very tired. I'm exhausted. I'm going to sleep. But Sarah grabbed him. There was a hint of panic in her eyes. The living cannot compete with the dead. If that daughter had continued to live, Ethan probably wouldn't have treated her any differently. But now that she was gone, so young, his guilt would only grow, and that would be detrimental to Jason. Ethan, don't be too hard on yourself. You were always good to her. She died of heart disease, right? I remember Clara had heart problems too. Maybe it runs in the family. Or maybe, could it be karma? Clara did a lot of wrong back then, tearing us apart. Maybe this is her retribution, passing on to her daughter. Sarah was usually quite calculating, but at this moment, she was too anxious. Before she could finish, Ethan turned to her abruptly. His gaze was as cold as ice. Sarah. He spoke in a low voice. Her name was Lily. Sarah froze under his dark, piercing eyes, unable to move. You never even called her by her name. You kept saying she was Clara's daughter, reminding me again and again, banking on my hatred for Clara. Didn't you? Ethan had almost never shown Sarah the cold, ruthless side of himself. She was completely terrified. Without saying anything further, Ethan left her standing there and headed towards the door. Ethan, before Jason went to sleep, he said he hopes you can take him to play basketball tomorrow. Sarah made one last desperate plea. The only answer she got was the loud slam of the door. Ethan arrived at my apartment. He had come to help pack up my belongings. If it weren't for the fact that my spirit couldn't stop him, I really wouldn't want him going through my things. But there was nothing I could do. Ethan was my biological father. The law said our blood bond couldn't be broken. It said that, even in death, we were connected. He found many things I never wanted him to see, like my diagnosis of depression. I had been receiving psychological treatment since middle school. It started off mild but got worse over time. In fact, the school counselor had once called Ethan. She told him that Lily showed signs of severe depression and urged him to take me to a public hospital for further evaluation. Ethan had been overseas at the time, meeting an important client. After listening for a few minutes, he hung up on the counselor. How could Lily have depression? She was well-fed and well-clothed, attending the best school in the city. It wasn't like she was being abused. She was just like Clara, overly dramatic and always seeking attention. Later, Ethan sent his assistant to attend the parent-teacher meeting on his behalf. He asked around, and all of my classmates said I was cheerful and outgoing. Not only did I never show sadness, I was the first to comfort others when they were down. This only confirmed for Ethan that my depression was just a ruse. But now, faced with pages and pages of therapy records, his hands were trembling. The same word kept appearing in all those long conversations. Dad, from the first page to the last. It was the only consistent term. Doctor, you're so smart. Can you help me figure out what I did wrong to make Dad hate me so much? This was Lily, just starting middle school, during her first visit to the counseling office. The cuts on my wrist are from a ruler. Yes, not a knife. I still want to live. Okay. But recently, I've had these thoughts that someone like me, who no one likes, wouldn't be missed if I died. This was Lily. In her first year of high school, research suggests that during adolescence, self-identity formation relies heavily on parental influence. In other words, a child hated by their parents may come to believe they are inherently worthless, and in turn, start to hate themselves. Ethan's fingers shook as he turned to the last page. The final entry was from my senior year of high school, a week before my birthday. I've been taking my meds regularly. Don't worry, I've always followed the doctor's orders, but it seems like ever since I started, I can't feel sadness, but I also can't feel joy. It's so awful. I had a dream about Dad taking me to an amusement park. It was such a good dream, and I thought I'd be happy. But maybe because of the meds, I realized I couldn't feel any happiness at all. What a waste of a good dream. Did Dad ever take me to an amusement park? I'll answer that next time. Ha ha ha. Ethan put down the therapy records. He was silent for a long time before he turned off the lights, letting the darkness envelop him completely. He sat there in the darkness, tears dripping onto the records. Eventually, he covered his face, sobbing uncontrollably. Of course not. Of course he had never taken me to an amusement park. But on WeChat, I had seen pictures of him taking Jason to Disneyland. They posted a 9-photo grid, each picture filled with bright sunshine, father and son smiling, surrounded by Winnie the Pooh, Mickey Mouse, and Snow White. Fireworks lit up the night sky. It was the happiest place in the world. And I, even until my death, had never been to Disneyland. Ethan finished packing my belongings. There wasn't much. The closet seemed big, but it was mostly empty. For school uniforms, 2 for winter, 2 for summer, 1 down jacket, a few sports t-shirts and pants, socks rolled into small balls, neatly arranged, no dresses, no hairpins. It was clear the owner of this wardrobe wasn't into dressing up. Indeed, a girl who loathed herself could never appreciate her own beauty. Finally, Ethan found a doll at the bottom of the wardrobe, a doll in a pink dress. The light pink ruffled dress was old, with faded edges. But it was clean. The hair was neatly combed, soft and pretty. It was the only gift Lily had ever received from her father in her 18 years of life. She had treasured it, keeping it from elementary school to middle school to high school, from the dorm to home, always bringing it with her. Ethan held the doll tightly. Suddenly, He remembered the first time he saw Lily. She was only 3 months old, barely bigger than this doll. She looked at him with innocent eyes, just beginning to understand the world, and he had turned away coldly, not even giving her a hug. Now all he wanted was to give his daughter a hug, but in his arms there was only a cold doll. Sarah noticed that Ethan was starting to act strangely. She often woke up in the middle of the night to find Ethan sitting motionless beside her, staring out the window. "I dreamed of Lily," he murmured. "I dreamed that I took her to an amusement park." During board meetings, he started to drift off frequently, and the executives began to protest, claiming that Ethan was no longer fit to continue as CEO. So he stepped down. Sarah was anxious. She knew that asking too directly would provoke Ethan's resentment, but with his silence, she had to ask how he planned to distribute his shares and assets. Ethan replied calmly, "Donate all in Lily's name." That was when Sarah found out that Ethan had set up a fund named Lily. This charity fund was dedicated to helping all children in need, whether they were struggling financially and unable to continue their education, suffering from a toxic home environment, or victims of abuse or bullying. The fund employed professionals from various fields to provide the children with the help they needed. Sarah's worst fear had come true. Lily was dead, and the things Ethan hadn't given her in life. He now felt that no amount could be enough after her death. Out of desperation, Sarah wrote a tearful post online, trying to use public opinion to remind Ethan that he had a wife and a son. Lavishing most of his wealth on a deceased person was such a disregard for his family. However, Sarah didn't expect that within just a few days of her post, people would dig up all the past dirt. The narrative did not go her way, quite the opposite. In fact, Miss Lou kept calling Clara a homewrecker. "But why do I feel like you're the real third party? No matter what tricks Clara pulled, Mr. Brooks must have been willing, right? Who else is to blame for the child being born, regardless of who came first? Clara and Ethan had a marriage license, didn't they? That makes them a legally married couple. If I remember correctly, right after Clara died, her body barely cold, Mr. Brooks announced he was back together with a mess. Lou, those who loved gossip back then, may have aged out of it. But we didn't forget." Agreeing with the above, Sarah has always been the other woman, hasn't she? After Ethan married Clara, didn't she also have a scandal with some foreign tycoon? She only returned home because the tycoon's wife was too formidable. Honestly, Mr. Brooks should get a paternity test. That son might not even be his. And so, Sarah's career in entertainment came to an end, with more and more dirt being unearthed. She faced total disgrace. Ethan never returned home. In truth, if Sarah and Jason had lived frugally, the assets Ethan left behind would have allowed them to continue living comfortably for a long time. But Sarah couldn't accept this outcome. She poured large sums into investments recommended by friends, only to lose it all. So she convinced herself that it must be Lily's restless spirit, messing with the family's feng shui. And she hired one master after another to exorcise me. The masters all had their own methods, but the one thing they had in common was that they accepted large payments. None of it worked. I watched my translucent soul, realizing that I still couldn't leave this world. Perhaps the master's spells and my system just operated on entirely different wavelengths. Sarah cried every day, telling Jason, "Everything I do is for you." Jason's voice was icy. "Oh, please, if it weren't for you, I wouldn't be in this mess." Sarah was stunned. She had worked so hard to secure a future for her son, never imagining that one day she would hear such hatred in his voice. Jason truly hated Sarah. Of course, he also hated Ethan. This boy, spoiled all his life, believed that everything his parents provided him was his by right. "Give me money," he demanded, holding out his hand to Sarah. Sarah wept, saying, "We have no money left." Jason grew impatient. He kicked Sarah in the stomach and rummaged through the wardrobe for the last 2 rings, then took them to be pawned. He used the money to visit the most hidden part of a nightclub. What joy! Only in this brief stupor could he escape his problems and return to his former fantasy life. I floated through the nightclub, studying the worm that had grown from the honey jar of indulgence. As the strobe lights intermittently lit up the space, Jason drank heavily, eventually passing out on the couch. The last of his money already squandered. In fact, alcohol couldn't have cost that much. There were old needle marks on his arm. The latest one was on his neck. That night, the police raided the nightclub, arresting everyone except for Jason. By the time they found him, he was lying on the couch, his nose and mouth blocked by vomit, no longer breathing. Ethan didn't know about his son's death. His phone had been off for a long time. He was in the mountains, fasting and meditating, perhaps seeking inner peace. He offered incense and prayed before Buddha. He prayed that in the next life, I could be his daughter again, and he would make it up to me. The system seemed touched. It looked at Ethan's gaunt face and earnest prayers and said, "Your father truly regrets what he did. In the next life, would you want to be his daughter again?" I smiled and said, "No way." But the system tried its best. You know how stories like these go. Families, no matter how chaotic things get, always end with reconciliation. Everyone sits down together for a joyful reunion dinner. That's the standard ending for all family dramas. I don't particularly want to criticize such an ending. On the contrary, I understand it. People say they want to cut ties with their families, but in reality, perhaps only 1 in 10,000 can truly do so. The desire for love is a fundamental human trait, especially for teenagers who haven't yet stepped into the wider world. To a child, parents are everything. To bring about this happy ending, the system gave Ethan a dream. In the dream, Ethan heard a low electronic voice. It explained everything, why my death was inevitable if he didn't come to celebrate my birthday. For the first time in years, Ethan wept uncontrollably in his sleep. "It really was me who killed her. Your daughter does not blame you," the electronic voice said. "Would you like to see her one last time, sir?" The news of the Brooks Group's CEO's suicide made headlines. Ethan had leapt from the cliffs of Yunshan. The once mighty CEO spent his final days in a small storeroom at a mountain monastery, without any family or friends by his side. Living in extreme simplicity, the only decoration was a doll, in a pink dress. I saw Ethan's soul. He was walking towards me. His arms were open, tears streaming down his face. "Lily, it's Dad." Throughout my long life, I had dreamed of this scene countless times. In my dreams, I would run towards that embrace, feeling safe, thinking to myself, how wonderful it is to be a child loved by her father. But when I woke up, all I had was my phone, empty, without a single reply. So I took a step back and turned away. I heard Ethan ask the system, his voice desperate, "Why? Why can't I catch up to Lily?" The system was silent for a long time before finally answering him. "Because your daughter doesn't want you to catch up. She has grown up now, and if she doesn't want you to catch up, you can never hold her back again." I smiled. So that's it. I ran forward, faster and faster. No looking back, no reconciliation. If I kept running ahead, I would eventually meet people who truly loved me. The world ahead grew wider and wider. Finally, a bright white light engulfed me, and I saw my form finally fade into transparency. "Goodbye, Ethan. Goodbye, Lily." Later, Ethan saw Lily once more. He begged the system to let him see how Lily was doing. The system agreed, but the cost was that Ethan's soul would dissipate entirely. Ethan agreed. And so, he really did see Lily in the new world. She had her hair in pigtails, wearing overalls, eating a milk ice cream bar. The moment she saw him, she cried out in surprise, "Daddy!" She ran towards him. Tears welled in Ethan's eyes, and he opened his arms. He had never felt so excited. He was finally going to hold his daughter. But in the next moment, Lily ran right through him. She ran into the arms of the man behind him, who lifted her up with a smile. He was a tall, burly man, wearing a chef's uniform, his face covered in grease and sweat. But Lily didn't mind at all. She happily smeared ice cream on his face, giving him a mustache. "Daddy's a big kitty now?" The man chuckled and lifted Lily onto his shoulders. "All right, let's go home. What does Lily want to eat? Daddy will cook it." Ethan stood there, stunned, and followed them home. It was a very small house, deep in an alleyway. The kitchen didn't even have a range hood. The air was thick with the scent of cooking, but Lily sat on a small stool, doing her homework. Her smile was so bright. Ethan had never seen such an expression on her face in all his previous life. I have good news. Such an expression on her face in all her previous life. I have good news. Lily, Dad got promoted to head chef, and my salary increased by 1,500 yuan. Summer break is next week. How about Dad takes you to Disneyland? Lily cheered in excitement. But that's not all, Tata. Look what I have. Ethan watched as the man pulled out a gift like a magician, holding it up for Lily, a doll in a pink dress. Lily was overjoyed. She took the doll and rushed into her bedroom. There was a cheap wooden cabinet there, and Lily opened the door. Ethan froze. Inside were many dolls. Some wore red dresses, some white, others in biker gear with sunglasses. So she didn't just like pink. He realized then that he had never really known her. That was Ethan's final thought. In the next moment, a gust of wind blew, and his soul scattered into the chilly northern breeze. Lily seemed to sense that someone was watching her. She turned around, but the room was empty. Whoever it was must have left. She shook her head and carefully brushed the hair of the doll in the pink dress before placing it among the other dolls. In her future life, she would receive many, many more gifts.